Okay. Um, Let me see if there's, oh, I want to tell you that I am uploading a sample paper. It's an actual student research paper submitted. It's not perfect, but it's a good sample to show you kind of what I'm looking for with this final exercise. I realize if you're like me, it helps me to see how somebody else did something successfully. So I'm going to upload a copy of that. I'm also working on a rubric. I said at the beginning of the semester that my guidelines are actually a type of rubric. It's almost like I look through and it's check, check, check. I mean, did you meet this guideline? Did you meet this guideline? But some students need something that's a bit more visual, like with the little boxes and everything. So I'm working on a rubric for this final assignment. I've used them before, but I'm actually sort of adapting something I've used before. And I will upload that too in the week 11 folder so that you will see essentially how this how this final paper will be graded and what I'm looking for. Although honestly, it will just contain the same information I'm about to go over in these guidelines. Okay, so let's begin. In my face-to-face classes, again, literally I distribute the guidelines and then we go over them and I add more information and take questions. So please don't hesitate if at any time you have a question about anything I'm asking you to do. Please do not hesitate to stop me and ask questions. Type them, or if you've got a microphone, feel free to unmute yourself and talk, okay? So here's some, you might want to take notes as I go on anything that I cover that is useful and adds to what I've already have up here or that I clarified. First thing is, of course, a length requirement. And again, as much as I hate giving word counts because oftentimes students just write to fit the word count. And what's more important is that you have really something to say. But a goal of the class is to teach you to write to fit any assignment. So the word count for this particular paper is doubled from what you've been doing, anywhere from 1250 to 1500 words. Now, I'm going to tell you that you can fudge a little bit shorter. For example, like 1100 words. So let's just say 1100, and it can be a little bit longer. Let's say 1750, because honestly, in a word count, normally part of that is your references page, right, with your bibliographic references. It's not the actual words that are part of the paper. So again, if you want to add some, want to write this down somewhere, it can be between, if we're talking broad range and still hit the target, right, roughly 1100, I don't know why that font's so large, to 1750. Shorter than that, and what it means is that you have not done enough research. It means you need to do more work, or you've underdeveloped some of your points. Longer than that, and you're not controlling the information. The information's controlling you. I had a student a few years ago who submitted a paper that was 3,500 words, and essentially everything he found he put in that paper. And of course, it didn't meet this requirement, but also his thesis was much narrower, and so he kind of overshot it by quite a bit by providing information he didn't need to include. All right, number two, and this is where the issue proposal comes in. If you've had a chance to look over that document and the assignment that's required this week, before you ever begin, what I want you to do, please, is to write the issue proposal, and we'll go over that in a second. But you need to take a side on a clearly debatable issue. In other words, people disagree, but I've added some additional information here in this age of misinformation. It's not just that there's more than one opinion. It means that there is reliable, unbiased, and factual support for both sides. Okay, so this is not just opinion, because that's one of the things about argumentation that sometimes students don't understand if you've never had to write an argumentation paper. It's a more formal approach to persuasion. It's a type of persuasion, but it's not opinion based. It's essentially, it focuses more on logos, which is fact-based information. It's more about logic and reason. And when you're talking about logic and reason, I mean, the thing about opinions, obviously this is going to be your opinion about a subject, and but what you're doing is using support, and that's where the research comes in to to build a case to have somebody agree with you. We'll talk more about that in a minute as well. So you want to be able to use reliable information because you are trying to change somebody's mind or get them to do something. So with the issue proposal, this gives me an opportunity to take a look at what you're proposing to do. It gives you a chance to think it through. And then I can give you some immediate feedback if, A, I think the topic actually fits this assignment. That's important to know. If you may have trouble finding information, depending on what it is you want to do, I can let you know that. And I always recommend for students, no matter what you're writing, always have a backup topic in case you get into this and it's not working for you. So have one topic in mind that you think that you want to do, and then have a backup topic so that you can switch to if you need to. Now, if you look at your issue proposal guidelines, and I didn't upload them because we're covering so much information so quickly that, well, maybe I did. Let me see if I did. Yeah, okay, I did. A couple of comments about this. I'm going to try and steer you away from the errors that some students make if they do this a little too quickly. Now, obviously, this is only 25 points. This is a beginning document where you're thinking through what it is you want to do. It's 4 paragraphs, so if you have 5, it will count off because, again, I'm very specific about what I want, okay? So, and you upload it as soon as you've got an idea in mind, and I'm checking. I haven't started responding yet. I was going to wait until after this session. And if you've already submitted an issue proposal and after this session you realize, okay, you need to change something, please remember and turn it in. You can overwrite or whatever you've submitted, which means you can upload on top of a paper until the due date. And on the due date, whatever's there is frozen. I can always delete it for you. You can let me know if you need to upload a revised version. Anyway, so I'm going to try and stay on top of all this weekend grading, reading those and getting back to you, so that as soon as your issue is approved, you can begin research. Okay. So remember that, a solid paragraph, 4 or more sentences, usually 5 or more, but in this case, we're going to say 4. And I'm very specific about what I want. Okay, so you have a title, and the title's, whatever your topic is. And the first paragraph actually sets up what it is that you think you want to do. And it ends in questions. Now, here's the first error that often students make. They write a paragraph full of questions. That's not what I'm asking for here. This is, and I think I've mentioned this in the last live session, but this is called an ellipsis. And you may know this already, ... There's 4 dots here because it simply means that this is the end of this sentence. So that's one of those is a period. But that means I left out a lot of stuff, all right, before I got to the question part. Because I actually did copy this. It is interesting that a small, blonde, blue-eyed plastic doll could cause an uproar, and then there's more information. All of these are statements of fact until you get to the end of the paragraph, and that's where the questions are. If you do not have questions at the end of this paragraph, it will count off, all right? I'm going to be just as straight with you as I can about how I'm going to grade this, all right? Paragraph 2, this is personal, all right? You talk about why you're interested. I'll give you an example here of how this second paragraph began. Paragraph 3 tells me what you already know about the issue. If it's nothing, that's kind of what you say, right? I don't really know much about this. I'm just interested in it, and so forth. And then paragraph 4, this is not a research paragraph. This is the second big error that students make. They think they're supposed to do research and put it in this 4th paragraph. This is the paragraph where you tell me what it is that you want to find. And again, you should use first person. This is the paper itself you shouldn't use first person I because it's not an opinion paper. The only time that you as the writer should appear in this final paper, which is the most academic paper that you will write for me, and by academic we do mean college level, right? That mid-level standard American English. The only time that it's really kind of acceptable to put yourself in this paper is if you have direct experience, all right? And you can, and somehow or another that helps develop your point. But for the most part, you should not put I or I think, I believe, or so forth, because that's not what this is, all right? You let the research do the talking for you, basically. So paragraph 4, you shouldn't do research. What you're telling is what you're telling me here is this is what the kinds of research I want to find. This is what I'm looking for. And then I do give you a sample paper, and you'll notice, the sample, and again, none of these are perfect. These student samples, sometimes I go back in and try and clean up grammar or punctuation. Usually there are issues with punctuation. But you'll notice that, again, this ends with questions, right? It starts out with statements, it ends with questions. And then notice that the student actually began with, the interest paragraph begins with I am interested. The knowledge paragraph begins with I know, okay? And then the final paragraph about what the student wants to find out. So what I will do is when I read your issue proposals, I'll have a comment at the very top in that first blue, probably the only blue box, that will say issue approved or issue tentatively approved. And then I'll explain why it's tentative, that you might need to rethink something. And so you should be able, I will try and get that back to you as quickly as possible. Any questions about the issue proposal? Okay, please do not do research until your issue's approved. Now, I personally have taken some information, taken certain topics off the table simply because I've been teaching research for over 30 years and I'm tired of reading these papers, okay? A lot of times, because students do often feel passionate, now animal testing is almost not as popular a topic anymore as perhaps some others, but because students tend to feel very passionately, these are obviously controversial topics and students feel very passionate about them, they often think of them first. And the problem for me is I've just read those papers so many times I really don't want to read about it anymore, both pro and con. If I'm doing my job well as your instructor, you will never know my religious beliefs, you'll never know my political beliefs, because that's not my job. My job is to evaluate your writing, so and to help you improve. And so it's really not that. It's just I've just read about those so many times that I don't want to read anything else about it. Also, you can't recycle a research paper. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of hints about good topics. I do want you to choose something that you care enough about that you're going to spend, several weeks researching, okay? That matters. However, if you are so passionate about what you choose that you really are not kind of open to where the information takes you, that may not be, in other words, you're not willing to change your mind even, that may not be a good topic for this paper, and here's why. It gets more into the realm of the heart, the emotions for you, than it does logos, fact-based. And so I've had students who really, that's become a problem, because especially they'll end up using really biased sources. They'll try and find things that very much line up with what they believe. And what happens is, if you're not evaluating how reliable those sources are, even if they're national voices, if they are just people with opinions, not expertise, they're not reliable sources. I mean, that's the thing about opinions, right? We all have them. So often students who feel too passionately about a subject, it can get them in trouble. Also, if you're too close to a subject, that can get you in trouble. I have had people try and write about things that again, they still have an emotional response to, and they haven't worked through it. And what happens is that either they back off from the paper, so the paper becomes very general, or they're too close to it and they can't, it's almost too personal for them. And so they can't look more objectively at how they're crafting this, putting this paper together. So those are some things to think about. One of my favorite examples, a few years ago, I had two students who chose to write about the legalization of marijuana, but they were on opposing sides. I mean, this was their choice because it interested them. And the guy was going to argue against legalizing marijuana until he did the research, and then he changed his mind. And the lady was going to argue in favor of legalizing marijuana until she did the research, and then she changed her mind. And both had legitimate source material to kind of support the direction that they went. So that's what I'm saying. You have to, I'm not saying you should be neutral, and this paper by no means should be an information paper where you present both sides. That's not an argument, as we'll talk about in a second. But you do need to kind of be open to, the more rigid you are, the more frustrating this experience will be. The more that you feel like this is what I want to find and this is what I want to say, it's good to have those ideas, but if you hold them too tightly, often this will be a very frustrating experience. Okay. All right, sources, you must use at least 5. Now, however, there's no maximum. So however many it takes to get this, to get the information that you need, you know, that's how many you do. That's up to you. But you must use at least 5, okay? 3 must come from the databases. The papers I've had that often were the weakest were the ones that when I didn't say this, when I didn't have a requirement that you use the database material or use Primo to find information, then those were often the weaker papers, because that puts it on you, the writer, to do the evaluation. Any information that you find in the GNTC databases, oh, I am cutting out? Okay. Let me know if it continues. Any information that you use to find, I mean, any of the sources that you use in the GNTC databases is reliable, okay? Now, Credo reference is a good starting place, but all of your information should not come from Credo reference. And facts on file, which I showed you, I think I showed you in an earlier video, and you can access that under databases A to Z, is a good place to find source material, as well as a good place to find information. But I think it was the library scavenger hunt. But your whole paper should not be sourced from facts on file, okay? 1 or 2, fine. Credo, again, provides like encyclopedic type information, dictionary. It's a good starting place, but you don't want to stick, you know, have everything come from that. How am I doing now? Is it still cutting out? Somebody let me know. I quit talking. Somebody type and let me know. Can you hear me? Is that true for everybody? Somebody, every other word. Okay, that's not good. Okay, so in that case, and McKinley, I'm not cutting out for you. Okay, so Alton, then in this case, it's probably on your end. It probably has to do with internet speeds or buffering. If you have a lot of other tabs open, okay, if you have a lot of tabs open, sometimes that's the issue. So if it continues, Alton, I would either log out and log back in. Sometimes that fixes the problem. No, there's no quiz on this, Judah, but you have to go back and watch all the video, okay? And my recommendation is if it continues to, have a good afternoon. My recommendation is if it continues to cut out, log back in, or just wait and watch the video, okay? Because I will send out that link tonight. All right, direct quotations, no more, you should use them. Please hear me. Sometimes students think that I'm saying everything has to be paraphrased or summarized. I'm not. But if more than 20% of your paper is directly quoted from other sources, there are too many people doing the talking. So even though you're relying heavily on your information from other people and from what they have said, other source material, you should be putting it in your own words. Okay, that just has to do with if it's cutting out for some people and not for others, that's unfortunately at your end rather than mine. There's nothing I can do about that. So you know, if you log out and then log back in, try that. If that doesn't work, then I would wait and just watch the video, okay? Because I can't fix it. So please hear me. Sometimes students think that I'm saying, you know, they should not use direct quotations. Absolutely you should, but it should only be information that is like if it's an expert talking, let them do the talking, like directly quote from them. Or if something's really beautifully phrased, um, you know, that if you try and put it in your own words, it just will not work. You know, you just can't paraphrase it well. Then definitely directly quote it. What this paper should not be, though, is a copying and pasting vast amounts of other sources. That's not you controlling your research, and that's certainly not you thinking through the information, putting it in your own words, still documenting it, you know, still giving credit. Now, a reminder that Turnitin, the similarity report, tells you what percentage of the paper is directly quoted. Just to remind you really quickly of what that looks like. If you give me just a second and I will pull that up. This is a sample student paper from the past. You will notice that in the similarity, this is where you find the similarity report. It's right here. And so this 19 means 19% of this student's paper, the system matched to other papers. Now, notice that's not the same thing as plagiarism. As long as you've got quotation marks around the matched information, unless it's kind of separated like this, it is not plagiarism. So you know the quotation mark, and then here on the right hand side it shows the paper or the website to which something was matched. This is one of the ways you can check not only how much of your paper you're actually directly quoting to meet that threshold I've given you, but also make sure that you're handling your direct quotations accurately by putting quotation marks around them, as well as by providing in-text citations. Okay, so a reminder, this works for you. Let Turnitin work for you. You just have to upload the paper early enough so that you know, you can go back and take a look at it. All right, continuing, then I'll pause and see if you have any questions before we go on. Format's the same one we've been using. You do not need a title page. We're still using the same header in the upper left-hand corner. You still need a double space. You need to use a regular font that's 12 points. And by regular font, we're talking about Times New Roman or Arial, sort of the popular fonts that are considered professional looking. You do want to center a title over the work. And you do need to indent the first line of each of your paragraphs. It will count off if you do not do this, all right? Because at this point, we've been using the same format all semester. All right, we're going to talk about appeals in just a second. Claim is the word in argumentation that we use to mean thesis. So this is the main point that you are trying to make. As far as deductive and inductive and how to arrange information, this we are going to cover in week 14 when you're ready to actually start drafting. Okay, so don't worry about this right now. I'm the audience. Again, I'm going to, you know, I'm neutral. Just think of me as being pretty neutral. But what I am looking for is that you do know not to use, I'm still seeing a lot of contractions in student work. Your, isn't, wasn't, couldn't, shouldn't, wouldn't, or the use of second person YOU. Be sure for any source material that you get using a popular search engine, it's on you to evaluate it. When I look over your drafts, you know, I will check. I don't want to devote a lot of time to having to double check your sources. That's the reason I prefer you use the GNTC databases. So remember, a minimum of 3. All of them can definitely come from the GNTC resources. But if you do choose to use Google or Bing or something like that, then it's up to you, the writer, to make sure that the information is reliable. Documentation, of course, is what we've been practicing. If you are still struggling, again, don't hesitate to establish an appointment with me. What we will do when you schedule an appointment is use Blackboard Collaborate, right? Just like we're doing right now. It'll just be you and I one-on-one. I'll pull up your papers, we'll go through it, we'll look where you're having problems, I'll answer your questions. Also, please be sure and look back. There's several assignments. everything from the plagiarism quiz to the documentation assignment, which I'm still grading, to the comparison contrast with research essay, to the definition right. And by the way, I'm still working. I'm still a little bit behind. I should have all the definition rights graded by tomorrow. So if you haven't gotten your grade back yet with the explanation, it should be done by tomorrow. But those are the specific assignments that we've been using to build toward this large paper. And I always, if I count off, I always type comments and explain why. So if you're not going back and looking at what happened, please do so. Please return and see what my comments are, so that, because how do you know what to fix if you don't kind of look back at my information? But we are using, of course, you'll need a reference page at the end. Please note, I cannot pass the paper. It cannot make above a 75, and that's for unintentional plagiarism. If that's my policy, it's on the syllabus. If you don't mean to, if you intentionally plagiarize, submit something knowing that you didn't write it, then that's a 0, of course, but that almost never happens. Students don't do that. Usually if they plagiarize, it's unintentional, but I try and read and check for that. That's part of what I try and help you with when I look over your drafts, and help you identify those problems and correct them, okay? Also, please note, if you use MLA formats, I can't pass the paper. I'm intentionally teaching APA. That's what we've been focused on. That's what we've been working with. I still have occasionally students who use MLA formatting, and that's, doesn't meet this major requirement. Fallacies we'll talk about week 13. You'll have a little assignment with fallacies, but that's essentially when you're ready to start drafting the paper, so we're not going to worry about that now. And then diction, of course, I'm repeating myself, but you need to elevate your diction using standard American English. Your issue proposal is due by Monday. Try and get it in sooner, because the sooner I get it and approve it, the sooner you can begin your research. First draft is not due until after Thanksgiving, so you've got quite a bit of time, but please do not procrastinate. I was telling my class today, my face-to-face class that meets today, that if I were doing this assignment, I used to procrastinate too. I used to be huge. I relied on it because I got away with it, quite frankly. But I've learned better. I've learned I never do my best work. I really don't care about what I'm doing, because I'm doing it at the last minute. I'm putting no energy into it except for maybe pulling an all-nighter, to get it done. But I don't care. But that kind of means I don't care about my work. So I have learned personally to start early. So if I were going to do this assignment, I would literally try and look up, maybe instead of sitting down all day. Now you may work differently, but instead of sitting down all day one day and trying to do all the research, I'd probably try and find a couple of articles a day. So more about that in a minute. But anyway, the draft of the paper is not due until November 29th for me to review. Again, I'll record feedback, I'll type feedback. I don't take late drafts, although if you get into some kind of trouble, let me know early, not the due date, okay, unless it's a verifiable emergency. I can always work with students to give extensions. Pretty quick turnaround time. This is Thursday. I'll give you my recorded feedback. The final paper is due on December 6th, although you can turn it in up to 2 or 3 days late with a penalty. All right. All right. That was me talking a lot. Does anybody have any questions at this point? If no, I want to talk for just a second about field research. I think I skipped over reading this part, but it is on your, it is on those guidelines in your source material. You may use one piece of field research unless you have a lot of sources, and then you can use 2, all right, other sources. The field research is research you conduct yourself, and I don't mean looking online. I mean you actually go out into the field and find and collect information. Now here's the definition, and this PowerPoint I did upload today in your week 13, your week 11 folder, so it's available. It's just got a little bit of information here. There are 3 main types of field research: interviews, surveys, and direct observations. Interviews, if you know someone who can actually contribute because they're an expert or have a lot of experience with the subject matter that you want to write about, then interview them. You can do it in person, you can do it via email or on the phone, but it's usually more formal than just sitting down and chatting. Usually you arrange it in advance. You actually write out your list of questions first, so you're not, and then you take notes as you talk and as the person answers the questions, and and you're of course not limited to those questions, but and then you reflect on if the information is useful. If you do an interview and you want to know how to document it in your paper, email me and I'll be glad to. It's very simple to document. Okay. The second form of field research is observing. Okay. For example, if you intend to go into education, for example, and teach at the elementary school, junior high school level, kindergarten, you will be required to do observations. And this is separate from actually doing student teaching. I had a class that was all about observation, and I was assigned to particular schools, and I had to keep a journal, and I sat in the back of the room, and I literally had to write out what was going on through those observations. So observations, I had a student who wanted to write about discipline in kindergarten, and she had this particular argument she was going to make, and so she literally sat in on some kindergarten classes and looked at how, for example, the teachers handled if students were off task, how teachers handled if students, were hit or, somehow or another hurt another kid. Set up appointments if necessary, take detailed notes, and then you analyze your observations. The detailed notes are kind of important. You don't have to turn these into me by any stretch, but that's part of the process. Okay. And then finally, surveys. I realize, I think Facebook and some other social media allow you to create surveys that you can send out to your people you're friends with on social media if you use it. This is a great little tool. I don't know if you're familiar with it, surveymonkey.com. It's free. I know our college uses it. I know businesses use it frequently. It's a free site where you can set up an account, develop a survey, and then, email the link to different people that you want to take the survey. So what you do when you're doing this type of field research, you compile a list of questions. They should be short and focused. You should decide on your audience. And by the way, the questions should not be skewed to get a certain type of response, right? And it should be sent not just to people who you think will agree with you. If a true survey, you're taking a random sample of people who are all along the spectrum and see what they have thought about your topic and see what they think. And then you design it, and then you analyze the results. And if it's useful, then you use the information. I had a student some years ago, and I'm just giving you some examples because I'm trying to show rather than just tell, okay? I had a student several years ago who was in the Marines, I think, and she wanted to argue that women should be allowed in combat, like front lines combat. And I think at the time, I don't know what the rule is now, but I think at the time they were not allowed to be in front lines combat. And so she created a survey and she distributed it among her, platoon or whoever, and then used the results to as part of her argument. All right, I'm going to pause there. So again, you're not required to do field research. That's up to you. If you want to, fine. Again, though, the whole paper is not based on field research. If you've got 5 sources, then one of those can be field research. If you're doing more than 7, then you can have 2 pieces of field research. Any questions about this? Great. All right, I'm going to see if this, oh good, it looks like it loaded. This PowerPoint is in this week's folder. I'm going to make a couple of comments about this information. Your textbook does not, I'm not really necessarily that pleased with the information it presents about argument and persuasion. Argument is a form of persuasion. It is a form that has been codified, which means there have been rules made about it over the years, actually starting with the Greeks. If you know anything about Greek culture, free men could vote at the time as far as their government processes. And so orators, speakers, would stand on the corner and try and convince people to agree with certain things and in order before they voted. And so it actually started with Aristotle, who codified. And to codify means to turn into law or to make laws about. And so what Aristotle did was to take what was commonly the common practices, and he wrote them down and classified them. And so a lot of our language now that we use to discuss argument, which is more formal and more logical, comes from Aristotle. So, this is the little definition, and again, the claim is the author's point of view. But notice an argument, the goal is not to express your opinion, okay? Argument has a very particular, one of four, and I've got three here, there's actually a fourth, 4 goals in mind, okay? One is to convince an audience to accept something. Okay, maybe it's something new, but to convince them to accept it, or to adopt a solution, or to change their opinion. And the fourth reason is to take some action, to try and convince readers, in this case, to take some action. So notice that you have to handle that differently than just, okay, here's my opportunity to tell you how I feel. That's not argument. That could be persuasion, but it's not argument. All right, and that's the reason argument is mainly based on logos. Logos is appeal to reason, your head, if you will. Pathos is another type of appeal, and again, all of these are the classical methods. Classical meaning going back to the ancient Greeks. The classical methods for developing argument. Pathos means to appeal to your emotions or your heart. Ethos means to appeal to your value systems. This is the one that you want to emphasize right here, because this is what it's all about. Okay, and the slides after this explain why, really. When we're talking about logos, as you do your research, this is the type of thing you're looking for. You're looking for test results, statistics, actual documents, especially coming from court cases or the government, expert testimony, eyewitness testimony, interpretation example, hypothetical examples, and surveys. Think about being in a court of law before a judge. If you were arguing something before a judge, you are trying to weigh down one side. If you've got the scales, you are trying to put so much evidence on one side of the scale that you're tipping it in your favor. And so that's the kinds of things you're looking for. They can be examples, certainly, hypothetical examples. Notice the surveys here. But it's based more on appeals to somebody's logical, critical thinking, all right? And that's the dominant method of developing an argument. Now, it doesn't mean that there may not be some pathos. Pathos is appeal to emotion. It's appeal to somebody's heart. And you usually do, if you're talking about emotions, usually that happens through either fear or desire, to get people to be afraid of something or to get people to want something. And it can be very powerful, and I listed some things that they all didn't translate well here, but I listed some different ways that we play on fears and desires. All advertising, for example, contains pathos. It may contain logos as well, but all of it contains pathos because it's trying to play on your desire for thing or your fear for something else. Now, here's the problem with pathos, though. Pathos can be very powerful. You can definitely get people to move or to do something to be convince them to agree with you. But the disadvantages are that it often provides limited factual support. When you don't have much factual support, you just have to keep people riled up all the time or desiring something all the time. It can also very easily backfire. I always think of that commercial, you may have seen it on television, of it's about the treatment, the cruelty, cruelty to animals. I can't remember the name of that particular organization, but it's got this poor, abused dog, and in the background is Sarah McLachlan singing the song "In the Arms of the Angels," and the goal is they want you to contribute. They want you to send them money, but it backfires because that particular commercial is so difficult that and so painful to watch that you know, I never make it through the commercial, and if it comes on when I'm watching television, did you really, Jenny? It's already, you saw it today. I can't believe they're still showing it, and I guess maybe it works in some quarters, but most of us, I've taken a survey of my students, most of us will not watch the whole thing. We click off of it. So you'll notice how, oh, your grandson loves the puppies. Yeah, people are animal lovers often, well, real animal lovers. But the effects can be really short-lived, and so you have to keep people like coming back for some, you know, if you're trying to keep them emotionally desirous or angry, and it can easily backfire. And for example, that commercial, it probably doesn't have the total impact I think it's going to. Finally, ethos. Ethos has to do with standards, all right? All organizations have standards. And this has to do with ethos is the appeal to the spirit or to your conscience, to your sense of right or wrong. And so it offers support to an argument by using shared value systems. Notice, but the operative words here are shared values, okay? Ethos reflects deeply held convictions rather than personal motivations. And so these are some categories where you find ethos in all religions, right? What they value, what they believe, the belief systems. Patriotism has sets of value systems. Standards. If you work at, for example, I'm a teacher, and so there are certain sets of standards, like how I'm supposed to dress, the hours I'm supposed to be here, the way I'm supposed to conduct myself in the classroom, my interactions with students, what I'm supposed to do with emails. It tells you what my particular school values, because those are the standards to which it holds its instructors. Any of you who have a job, your job has standards, right? Some places don't care if you're late. Some places you've got to clock in immediately on time. Some places have a dress code, some places don't. That's what we're talking about with standards. And then humanitarianism does overlap with religion somewhat, but it's actually more how overall you think people should be treated kind of outside of religious belief. Now, here's the thing about ethos. If your audience agrees with you, it's very powerful. But if the people to whom you're writing or speaking do not agree with you, and the goal of argument is to convince them to agree with you, it will not work if they don't share your value system, because you're not going to change their values probably. Does that make sense? So for example, if I'm someone who is not the least bit patriotic, right, and my particular subject has to do with something and my audience tends to be very patriotic, and I don't take that approach, it may not work. You know, it may not convince them at all. If I believe, if I'm a very conservative person, say religiously, and I'm writing a paper and my audience is not conservative, maybe they're religious, maybe they share the same religion that I do, but maybe they're not conservative, I am not going to successfully convince anybody to agree with me by trying to argue on the basis of that conservatism. And those are just some examples. Now, since I am your audience, please consider me neutral, therefore avoid ethos. Does that make sense? Unless you're quite sure that it's something that all of us would agree on. For example, as Americans, when it comes to our children, there's certain things we believe. For example, we believe that children under a certain age shouldn't work in the workplace for a wage. Other countries, that's not true. You know, young children are put to work really early and that kind of thing. So hopefully that's clear. Does anybody have any questions about argument in general? What we've just covered. Great. All right. So let's wrap this up by talking about now how to proceed. Once your issue proposal is approved, all right, you're ready to begin research. Sorry, water break. And so let's talk about how to go about doing this, and let me show you a couple of tips. The very beginning of the semester, some of the reading assignment had to do with writing as a process, and research is an early stage of the process. It's actually, you know, that whole creation, invention, pre-writing stage. Well, when you're collecting research, that's what you're doing, is you are informing yourself before you ever begin to shape the information and draft it. So this is early stage. That's the reason all of this comes first. Although please realize that research, um, you know, you can, even as you're drafting your paper, if you find you need to do more research, go out and do it. It doesn't necessarily stop and start at a certain point. Now, normally what drives your research is a question you want answered. And that's the reason I'm asking you to end your issue proposal with questions, okay? And the answer to your question or questions is your tentative thesis. This is what you think you want to prove. It's your claim. All right, and so you answer it by researching your subject. I do want you to keep a working bibliography of the materials that you consult. It is only beginning writers. So for example, if I say you have to have a minimum of 5 sources, only beginning researchers find 5 sources and stop, okay? True research goes far beyond what you may ever actually use in the paper as you try to inform yourself about your subject. So I'm requiring, and I haven't opened it yet, but after this session, I'm going to open the weeks 12 through 13 folder that contains the information for your annotated bibliography. Now, annotated bibliography is not the same thing as your references page, although it contains bibliographic entries. What it is a working document that you're going to turn in to me for a grade, but it shows me the sources that you consulted to try and pull together enough information for a paper, and then it contains a paragraph where you respond to that, those sources. Now, the weeks 12 and 13 folder contain the guidelines for this assignment. I don't have time to go over it in depth here. It contains a sample annotated bibliography. It contains the Turnitin Dropbox for the bibliography, and it also I've already recorded videos to walk you through the steps of doing it. So those videos will explain to you what to do. It is your working research document. The minute you begin research, you should begin your annotated bibliography. Literally open a Microsoft Word document, and as you read something, even if you end up never putting it in your paper, it still goes on your annotated bibliography. On this bibliography, I'm requiring that you have at least 8 different sources that you looked at as you're doing your research. Again, you may not use all of them, and field research doesn't count. You may not use all of them. You may only use 5 of them, 6 of them, but you still put them on your annotated bibliography because it documents your research process. And the reason I have students do this, you know, initially students feel like you're making us do more work. Why are you making us do more work? But after they do it, most of them are grateful because they find it helps them. The annotated bibliography is due the week before Thanksgiving, I believe. Because you do have like that full week off. GNTC got rid of its what they called fall break, which was in October. I voted to keep it, but my vote was overruled. And so instead what we did was combine those days for Thanksgiving week so that all students are off all that week, okay? Your annotated bibliography is due before that week, and then of course your drafted paper is due the week after. So again, all of this information is contained in the weeks 12 and 13 folder, which I'll go ahead and open for you. So you can, once you're ready to start research, you should start keeping your annotated bibliography. And by the way, students always ask this, so I'm going to go ahead and answer it. If you find you have to do more research, once you've submitted that assignment for the grade, it's a 50-point assignment, you don't have to go back and add to it, okay? Just turn in the final. One of the good things about it though is I will double check. It causes you to think through the information you're finding, and I will double check your bibliographic references to make sure they're accurate. All right, when we're talking about source material, whenever possible, use primary sources. And primary sources are first-hand information. If somebody interviews someone and puts it in a newspaper article, that's a primary source. If someone later writes about that newspaper article, that's a secondary source. Okay, they're commentaries or descriptions of primary sources. If you're in a literature class and you read a poem, that's the primary source. If you read a critical essay that talks about the poem, that's a secondary source. Okay, and then of course we talked about field research already. I did upload this PowerPoint to the week 11 folder as well today, so please be aware you can look back at it. A reminder, when you're looking for sources, use the following resources primarily, at least 3. Credo reference is a good place to start. It gives you an overview, it gives you like encyclopedic information, but don't stay there, all right? So I mentioned no more than 2 sources should come from Credo reference. Remember, you find it in the databases A to Z, GNTC library. Facts on File, wonderful resource that provides both pros and cons of a particular topic. No more than 2 Facts on File articles, though, please. Don't build a whole paper. As good as the source is, and you probably could use it, it's still a secondary source that's built on primary sources. So please don't overdo that. And then Primo, which is, of course, the card catalog. We're going to look at that last thing we're going to do because I want to show you where all the citation tools are. And that's where you can find other articles. Other possibilities. Sorry, this is taking a minute to load. Google Scholar. I realize a lot of high school teachers introduce their students to Google Scholar. All you have to type in a popular search engine is Google Scholar. Those sources are reliable. Anything that it's a big, vast database of scholarly, often peer-reviewed information. I find it kind of hard to use. That's the reason I don't really necessarily point students that direction, but feel free if you want to use Google Scholar. And again, you don't have to evaluate anything found here. It's when you use Google itself or Safari or Bing that it's on you to do the additional work. All right. Do not use Wikipedia. Please hear me. Do not build a paper with any Wikipedia sources. But what Wikipedia is good for, because it is a secondary source platform, at the very end, you will find all the bibliographic references used to build that particular page. And a lot of those are reliable, all right? So sometimes that's a place to start, okay? So again, limit your source. If I haven't said it enough, please, because I'm telling you, those are often the papers that are not that as successful unless students are really willing to take the time to dig and evaluate. I'm not going to go over this. We've done it before, but just to review, this is the order of reliability when you're talking about domain names. We went over all this, I think it was week 5-ish maybe. When you have to evaluate, this is what we're talking about, how biased, how credible, how accurate, how deep the information is, how current. Most of your topics, you're going to want to stick with information in the past 5 to 10 years, right? That's most everybody's topic, I would think. Anything older than that, it may not be updated. It may be outmoded. All right, taking notes. I am not requiring that you do that, anything like that, and turn it into me. That's not required. Okay. It used to be when I taught English, we taught students how to use old-fashioned note cards, where you would use 3x5 cards and you would use 4x for the, and each one would contain a bibliographic reference, and then the 4x6 cards would contain notes. That's not required. You can do it if you want to, all right? And I've got some information there about how to do it, but again, it's not required. I realize most students now print off sources and highlight them, or even cut and paste, but cutting and pasting is dangerous because just directly from the source material, because that's often leads to unintentional plagiarism. And I really want to emphasize that you need to paraphrase or summarize in your own words most of your source material, limiting direct quotations to 20% of the paper or less. All right. Whew, that was a lot. I've got one more thing to show you before we stop. Does anybody have any questions? And then we'll be done. Good question, Kimi. No, that's the only assignment that you, at this point, that you can redo, although it's just we're running out of time. And I honestly, I know I've mentioned it to some of you, but at the end of the semester, I round up grades. So if you're concerned about your average and you have, for example, a high B, and by high I do mean 88, 89, sometimes even 87 if it's high enough, I do round that to an A. If you have a high C, 70, a really high 77 or 78, 79, I round that to a B, and same with the D. The reason that I do that is because I'm trying to allow for the fact that there is some degree of subjectivity in grading, as much as we try and not. The only way to take out all subjectivity in grading essays is if you purely grade on grammar. You know, 2 points off for a comma. You know, I don't do that. I grade more holistically, but I do try and err in your favor at the end of the semester by rounding up. Okay, so I hope that kind of encourages most of you. All right, I want to show you final thing, and this is pretty important. And I'm sorry we're running a little bit long, but I do want to remind you, as you go into the GNTC library, and this is one way to get there. Let's just say I want to write about daylight savings time. I'm going to argue that I need to get rid of it. All right, I'm going to do search. I hope. Okay, hopefully you can see this, right? My list of articles. Again, here on the right-hand side, you do want to select full text. Otherwise, you might get summaries as well as full text articles that you can't read. I'm going to change my format. I want newspaper and I want articles. Books you don't have time for, although it's possible maybe some ebook chapters you could use. And then because the date is important, I'm going to check that, and I'm going to change from, let's just say 2010, everything from 2010 to 2021. Apply filters. Okay, is everybody with me? Can you see? Hopefully you can see this screen. No, is it frozen? Okay, yeah, I must be frozen. All right, there is a video in the weeks 12 and 13 folder that shows you where to find the citation tools on these articles. I already showed you I already showed you how to do it for to copy and paste when you use Credo reference. But anything that says cite, anytime you see a little icon, and they differ depending on the database, but anytime you see a little icon that says cite, click that. Make sure that it's APA, and all you have to do is copy and paste it. But again, the videos I've got one video in the weeks 12 and 13 session that shows you how to do that. And so it will literally, the system will literally create your bibliographic references for you. All you have to do is copy and paste them. The only exception to that is facts on file. Facts on file at the very end of bottom will give you the MLA reference. They used to also do APA, but now they only give you the MLA reference. So what you have to do in that case is copy the MLA reference and then change around the information to make it fit APA. So that's kind of on you to do. Be aware of that. But again, I did provide a video that shows you what I was about to show you, but evidently the system is not going to let me do it. All right, does anybody have any other questions for me? I hope that was helpful. I know it was long. Again, I'm going to send out this the recording, the link to the recording, so you can always look back at it. But just, go ahead, get your, do not begin research until your topic is approved. Again, I'll try and look at your proposal as soon as possible. So get that in as quickly as you can once you think you've come up with the subject. Make sure I approve it first. Again, I'll write a comment on there and give you credit for having submitted your proposal, your issue proposal, and then you're get started. Have a good afternoon.